Cycles and Human Destiny articles by H. P. Blavatsky. The Cycle Moveth Our Cycle and the Next Karmic Visions. H. P. Blavatsky Series No. 6 Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Ltd. Bangalore 560-004. Objects of the Theosophical Movement. I. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study, and 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. The articles of H. P. Blavatsky and W. Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by the Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. Reprint edition, 1981 by courtesy, The Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California. 90007, USA. Printed by V. N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560-009, and published by J. M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560-004. Forward. These 3 articles by H. P. Blavatsky cast an intense light of illustration on the theosophical teaching of cycles, as variously treated in the Secret Doctrine, particularly in the early pages of the section Cyclic Evolution and Karma in Volume I, and in Volume II from pages 300 to 306. The measure of their importance is suggested by the following: I. 642, in the West, since pagan wisdom has been repudiated as having grown from and been developed by the dark powers supposed to be at constant war and in opposition to the little tribal Jehovah, the full and awful significance of the Greek nemesis, or karma, has been entirely forgotten. Otherwise Christians would have better realized the profound truth that nemesis is without attributes, that while the dreaded goddess is absolute and immutable as a principle, it is we ourselves, nations and individuals, who propel her to action and give the impulse to its direction. Karma nemesis is the creator of nations and mortals, but once created, it is they who make of her either a fury or a rewarding angel. The cycle moveth, which first appeared in Lucifer for March, 1890, describes the multiple influences for spiritual awakening which are released by the returning cycle of the last quarter of every century, arousing insistent questioning and jiving evidence of what H.P.B., in a similar article, the tidal wave, called the great psychic and spiritual change taking place in the realm of the human soul. In The Cycle Moveth she identifies the outbreak of psychic and mesmeric manifestations and allied phenomena as an earlier revival of crude theosophy, providing the matrix for another cyclic impartation of the wisdom religion. Her work was both explanatory of the tide of psychism, since its waters were neither primordial nor pure, and an exposition in contemporary language of timeless philosophy, addressed to the passionate aspiration of the human soul. This article also describes the occult working of the ever-moving cycle in affecting writers of great power, such as Tolstoy, and inspiring thousands of intuitive individuals who are neither theosophists nor spiritualists. Our Cycle and the Next, reprinted from Lucifer for May, 1889, is an example of H.P.B.'s uncompromising vigor and slashing irony in exposing the sanctimoniousness and cant of modern civilization. Yet here, also, there is more than criticism. The article concerns the operation of impersonal cyclic law, and the moral accounting that complacency and towering neglect of justice in public affairs and opinion will inevitably bring. Even more forbidding is Karmic Visions, an allegory only in form, which appeared in Lucifer for June, 1888. We can hardly pause to admire H.P.B.'s exquisite prose, in view of the dread implications of this awesome soul biography for many of the nations of the present. The purpose of such searing drama can only be to contribute to a vast change of heart, to help initiate the thinking and acting that will, at long last, release from impotence those who are already filled with the final resolve of the tortured soul ego of karmic visions. It is to this fulfillment that a prophetic passage in the Secret Doctrine, I. 643, looks, with right knowledge, or at any rate with a confident conviction that our neighbors will no more work to hurt us than we would think of harming them, the 2/3 of the world's evil would vanish into thin air. Were no man to hurt his brother, karma nemesis would have neither cause to work for, nor weapons to act through. Lucifer, March 1890. The cycle moveth, let the great world spin forever down the ringing grooves of change. Tennyson. The goal of yesterday will be the starting point of tomorrow. Carlyle. He great mystic of the 18th century, the ardent disciple of Jacob Boehme. Louis Claude de Saint Martin used to say in the last years of his life, I would have loved to meet more with those who guess at truths, for such alone are living men. This remark implies that, outside the limited circle of mystics, which has existed in every age, people endowed with correct psychic intuition were still fewer at the end of the last century than they are now. These were, indeed, years of complete soul blindness and spiritual drought. It is during that century that the chaotic darkness and Babylonish confusion with regard to spiritual things, which have ever reigned in brains too crammed with mere scientific learning, had fully asserted their sway over the masses. The lack of soul perception was not confined to the *40 immortals of the French Academy, nor to their less pretentious colleagues of Europe in general, but had infected almost all the classes of society, settling down as a chronic disease called skepticism and the denial of all but matter. The messengers sent out periodically in the last quarter of every century westward ever since the mysteries which alone had the key to the secrets of nature had been crushed out of existence in Europe by heathen and Christian conquerors had appeared that time in vain. Saint Germain and Cagliostro are credited with real phenomenal powers only in fashionable novels, to remain inscribed in encyclopedias to purblind the better, we suppose, the minds of forthcoming generations as merely clever charlatans. The only man whose powers and knowledge could have been easily tested by exact science, thus forming a firm link between physics and metaphysics, Friedrich Anton Mesmer, had been hooted from the scientific arena by the greatest scholar ignoramuses in things spiritual, of Europe. For almost a century, namely from 1770 down to 1870, a heavy spiritual darkness descending on the Western Hemisphere, settled, as if it meant to stay, among cultured societies. But an undercurrent appeared about the middle of our century in America, crossing the Atlantic between 1850 and 1860. Then came in its trail the marvelous medium for physical manifestations, D. Home. After he had taken by storm the Tuileries and the Winter Palace, light was no longer allowed to shine under a bushel. Already, some years before his advent, a change had come over the spirit of the dream of almost every civilized community in the two worlds, and a great reactive force was now at work. What was it? Simply this. Amidst the greatest glow of the self-sufficiency of exact science, and the reckless triumphant crowing of victory over the ruins of the very foundations, as some Darwinists had fondly hoped, of old superstitions and creeds, in the midst of the deadliest calm of wholesale negations, there arose a breeze from a wholly unexpected quarter. At first the significant afflatus was like a hardly perceptible stir, puffs of wind in the rigging of a proud vessel, the ship called Materialism, whose crew was merrily leading its passengers toward the maelstrom of annihilation. But very soon the breeze freshened and finally blew a gale. It fell with every hour more ominously on the ears of the iconoclasts, and ended by raging loud enough to be heard by everyone who had ears to hear, eyes to see, and an intellect to discern. It was the inner voice of the masses, their spiritual intuition, that traditional enemy of cold intellectual reasoning, the legitimate progenitor of materialism, that had awakened from its long cataleptic sleep. And, as a result, all those ideals of the human soul which had been so long trampled under the feet of the would-be conquerors of the world's superstitions, the self-constituted guides of a new humanity, appeared suddenly in the midst of all these raging elements of human thought, and, like Lazarus rising out of his tomb, lifted their voice and loudly demanded recognition. This was brought on by the invasion of spirit manifestations, when mediumistic phenomena had broken out like an influenza all over Europe. However unsatisfactory their philosophical interpretation, these phenomena being genuine and true as truth itself in their being and their reality, they were undeniable, and being in their very nature beyond denial, they came to be regarded as evident proofs of a life beyond opening, moreover, a wide range for the admission of every metaphysical possibility. This once the efforts of materialistic science to disprove them availed it nothing. Beliefs such as man's survival after death, and the immortality of spirit, were no longer pooh-poohed as figments of imagination, for, prove once the genuineness of such transcendental phenomena to be beyond the realm of matter, and beyond investigation by means of physical science, and whether these phenomena contain per se or not the proof of immortality, demonstrating as they do the existence of invisible and spiritual regions where other forces than those known to exact science are at work, they are shown to lie beyond the realm of materialism. Cross, by one step only, the line of matter and the area of spirit becomes infinite. Therefore, believers in them were no longer to be browbeaten by threats of social contumacy and ostracism, this, also, for the simple reason that in the beginning of these manifestations almost the whole of the European higher classes became ardent spiritualists. To oppose the strong tidal wave of the cycle there remained at one time but a handful, in comparison with the number of believers, of grumbling and all-denying fogies. Thus was once more demonstrated that human life, devoid of all its world ideals and beliefs in which the whole of philosophical and cultured antiquity, headed in historical times by Socrates and Plato, by Pythagoras and the Alexandrian Neoplatonists, believed becomes deprived of its higher sense and meaning. The world ideals can never completely die out. Exiled by the fathers, they will be received with opened arms by the children. Let us recall to mind how all this came to pass. It was, as said, between the third and fourth quarters of the present century that reaction set in Europe as still earlier in the United States. The days of a determined psychic rebellion against the cold dogmatism of science and the still more chilling teachings of the schools of Buchner and Darwin, had come in their preordained and pre-appointed time of cyclic law. Our older readers may easily recollect the suggestive march of events. Let them remember how the wave of mysticism, arrested in its free course during its first 12 or 15 years in America by public, and especially by religious, prejudices, finally broke through every artificial dam and overflooded Europe, beginning with France and Russia and ending with England, the slowest of all countries to accept new ideas, though these may bring us truths as old as the world. Nevertheless, and notwithstanding every opposition, spiritualism, as it was soon called, got its rights of citizenship in Great Britain. For several years it reigned undivided. Yet in truth, its phenomena, its psychic and mesmeric manifestations, were but the cyclic pioneers of the revival of prehistoric theosophy, and the occult Gnosticism of the antediluvian mysteries. These are facts which no intelligent spiritualist will deny, as, in truth, modern spiritualism is but an earlier revival of crude theosophy, and modern theosophy a renaissance of ancient spiritualism. Thus, the waters of the great spiritual flood were neither primordial nor pure. When, owing to cyclic law, they had first appeared, manifesting at Rochester, they were left to the mercies and mischievous devices of two little girls to give them a name and an interpretation. Therefore when, breaking the dam, these waters penetrated into Europe, they bore with them scum and dross, flotsam and jetsam, from the old wrecks of hypotheses and hazily outlined aspirations, based upon the dicta of the said little girls. Yet the eagerness with which spiritualism and its twin sister spiritism were received, all their inanities notwithstanding, by almost all the cultured people of Europe, contains a splendid lesson. In this passionate aspiration of the human soul, this irrepressible flight of the higher elements in man toward their forgotten gods and the God within him, one heard the voice of the public conscience. It was an undeniable and not to be misunderstood answer of the inner nature of man to the then reveling, gloating materialism of the age, as an escape from which there was but another form of evil adherence to the dogmatic ecclesiastica conventionalism of state religions. It was a loud, passionate protest against both, a drifting towards a middle way between the two extremes, namely, between the enforcement for long centuries of a personal God of infinite love and mercy by the diabolical means of sword, fire, and inquisitional tortures, and, on the other hand, the reign, as a natural reaction, of complete denial of such a God. And along with him of an infinite spirit, a universal principle manifesting as immutable law. True science had wisely endeavored to make a way, along with the mental slavery of mankind, with its orthodox, paradoxical God. Pseudoscience had devised by means of sophistry to do away with every belief save in matter. The haters of the spirit of the world, denying God in nature as much as an extra-cosmic deity, had been preparing for long years to create an artificial, soulless humanity, and it was only just that their karma should send a host of P5CMT/O spirits or souls to thwart their efforts. Shall anyone deny that the highest and the best among the representatives of materialistic science have succumbed to the fascination of the Willowthuisps, which looked at first sight as the most palpable proof of an immortal soul in man, one, i.e., the alleged communion between the dead and the living, yet, such as they were, these abnormal manifestations, being in their bulk genuine and spontaneous, carried away and won all those who had in their souls the sacred spark of intuition. Some clung to them because, owing to the death of ideals, of the crumbling of the gods and faith in every civilized center, they were dying themselves of spiritual starvation, others because, living amidst sophistical perversion of every noble truth, they preferred even a feeble approximation to no truth whatever. But, whether they placed belief in and followed spiritualism or not, many were those on whom the spiritual and psychic evolution of the cycle wrought an indelible impression, and such materialists could never return again to their iconoclastic ideas. The enormous and ever-growing numbers of mystics at the present time show better than anything else the undeniably occult working of the cycle. Thousands of men and women who belong to no church, sect, or society, who are neither theosophists nor spiritual one. Let our readers recall the names of the several most eminent men in literature and science who had become openly spiritualists. We have but to name Professor Hare, Epes Sargent, Robert Dale Owen, Judge Edmonds, etc., in America, Professors Buttelroth, Wagner, and, greater than they, the late Drive. Pirogov, see his posthumous memoirs, published in Russkaya Starina, 1884-1886, in Russia, Zollner, in Germany, M. Camille Flammarion, the astronomer, in France, and last but not least, Messrs. A. Russell Wallace, W. Crookes, Balfour Stewart, etc., in England, followed by a number of scientific stars of the second magnitude. 2. We hope that the few friends we have left in the ranks of the spiritualists may not misunderstand us. We denounce the bogus spirits of séances held by professional mediums, and deny the possibility of such manifestations of spirits on the physical plane. But we believe thoroughly in spiritualistic phenomena, and in the intercourse between spirits of egos of embodied and disembodied entities, only adding that since the latter cannot manifest on our plane, it is the ego of the living man which meets the ego of the dead personality, by ascending to the devachanic plane, which may be accomplished in trance, during sleep in dreams, and by other subjective means. Ists are yet virtually members of that silent brotherhood, the units of which often do not know each other, belonging as they do to nations far and wide apart, yet each of whom carries on his brow the mark of the mysterious karmic seal, the seal that makes of him or her a member of the brotherhood of the elect of thought. Having failed to satisfy their aspirations in their respective orthodox faiths, they have severed themselves from their churches in soul when not in body, and are devoting the rest of their lives to the worship of loftier and purer ideals than any intellectual speculation can give them. How few, in comparison to their numbers, and how rarely one meets with such, and yet their name is legion, if they only chose to reveal themselves. Under the influence of that same passionate search of life in spirit and life in truth, which compels every earnest theosophist onward through years of moral obloquy and public ostracism, moved by the same dissatisfaction with the principles of pure conventionality of modern society, and scorn for the still triumphant, fashionable thought, which, appropriating to itself unblushingly the honored epithets of scientific and foremost, of pioneer and liberal, uses these prerogatives but to domineer over the faint-hearted and selfish. These earnest men and women prefer to tread alone and unaided the narrow and thorny path that lies before him who will neither recognize authorities nor bow before cant. They may leave Sir Oracles of modern thought, as well as the pecksniffs of time dishonored and dogma-soiled lay figures of church conventionality, without protest, yet, carrying in the silent shrine of their soul the same grand ideals as all mystics do. They are in truth theosophists de facto if not de jure. We meet such in every circle of society, in every class of life. They are found among artists and novelists, in the aristocracy and commerce, among the highest and the richest, as among the lowest and the poorest. Among the most prominent in this century is Count L. Tolstoy, a living example, and one of the signs of the times in this period. Of the occult working of the ever-moving cycle. Listen to a few lines of the history of the psycho-spiritual evolution of this aristocrat, the greatest writer of modern Russia, by one of the best feuilletonists in St. Petersburg. The most famous of our Russian authors, the word painter, a writer of Shakespearean realism, a heathen poet, one who in a certain sense worshipped in his literary productions life for the sake of life, in situ and for sich, as the Hegelians used to say, collapses suddenly over his fairy palette, lost in tormenting thought, and forthwith he commences to offer to himself and the world the most abstruse and insoluble problems. The author of the Cossacks and Family Happiness, clad in peasant's garb and bast shoes, starts as a pilgrim on foot in search of divine truth. He goes to the solitary forests. Skits 8 of the Raskolnikov. 1 visits the monks of the desert of Optino, passes his time in fasting and prayer. For his belles lettres and philosophy he substitutes the Bible and the writings of the Church Fathers, and, as a sequel to Anna Karenina, he creates his confessions and explanations of the New Testament. The fact that Count Tolstoy, all his passionate earnestness notwithstanding, did not become an Orthodox Christian, nor has suc. come to the wiles of spiritualism, as his latest satire on mediums and spirits proves, prevents him in no way from being a full-fledged mystic. What is the mysterious influence which has suddenly forced him into that weird current almost without any transition period? What unexpected idea or vision led him into that new groove of thought? Who know it save himself, or those real spirits, who are not likely to gossip it out in a modern séance room? And yet Count Tolstoy is by no means a solitary example of the work of that mysterious cycle of psychic and spiritual evolution now in its full activity, a work which, silently and unperceived, will grind to dust the most grand and magnificent structures of materialistic speculations, and reduce to naught in a few days the intellectual work of years. What is that moral and invisible force? Eastern philosophy alone can explain. In 1875 the Theosophical Society came into existence. It was ushered into the world with the distinct intention of becoming an ally to, a supplement and a helper of, the spiritualistic movement, of course, in its higher and more philosophical aspect. It succeeded, however, only in making of the spiritualists its bitterest enemies, its most untiring persecutors and denunciators. Perchance the chief reason for it may be found in the fact that many of the best and most intellectual of their representatives passed body and soul into the Theosophical Society. Theosophy was, indeed, the only system that gave a philosophical rationale of mediumistic phenomena, a logical raison d'etre for them. Incomplete and unsatisfactory some of its teachings certainly are, which is only owing to it is a religious hermitage. For Raskolnikov, a dissenter, hitherto persecuted and forbidden sex in Russia. The imperfections of the human nature of its exponents, not to any fault in the system itself or its teachings. Based as these are upon philosophies hoary with age, the experience of men and races nearer than we are to the source of things, and the records of sages who have questioned successively and for numberless generations the Sphinx of nature, who now holds her lips sealed as to the secrets of life and death. These teachings have to be held certainly as a little more reliable than the dicta of certain intelligences. Whether the intellect and consciousness of the latter be induced and artificial as we hold or emanate from a personal source and entity, it matters not. Even the exoteric philosophies of the Eastern sages, systems of thought whose grandeur and logic few will deny, agree in every fundamental doctrine with our theosophical teachings. As to those creatures which are called and accepted as spirits of the dead because, forsooth, they themselves say so, their true nature is as unknown to the spiritualists as to their mediums. With the most intellectual of the former the question remains to this day sub judice. Nor is it the Theosophists who would differ from them in their higher view of spirits. As it is not the object of this article, however, to contrast the two most significant movements of our century, nor to discuss their relative merits or superiority, we say at once that our only aim in bringing them forward is to draw attention to the wonderful progress of late of this occult cycle. While the enormous numbers of adherents to both Theosophy and Spiritualism, within or outside of our respective societies, show that both movements were but the necessary and, so to say, karmically preordained work of the age, and that each of them was born at its proper hour and fulfilled its proper mission at the right time, there are other and still more significant signs of the times. A few years ago we predicted in print that after a short cycle of abuse and persecution, many of our enemies would come round, while others would, and despoir de cause follow our example and found mystic societies. As Egypt in the prophecy of Hermes, Theosophy was accused by impious foreigners, in our case, those outside its fold, of adoring monsters and chimeras, and teaching enigmas incredible to posterity. E4 sacred scribes and hierophants are not wanderers upon the face of the earth. It was through no fault of good Christian priests and clergymen, and no less than the Egyptians in the early centuries of the new faith and era, had we, from fear of a still worse profanation of sacred things and names, to bury deeper than ever the little of the esoteric knowledge that had been permitted to be given out to the world. But, during the last 3 years all this has rapidly changed, and the demand for mystic information became so great, that the Theosophical Publishing Society could not find workers enough to supply the demand. Even the Secret Doctrine, the most abstruse of our publications notwithstanding its forbidding price, the Conspiracy of Silence, and the nasty, contemptuous flings at it by some daily papers has proved financially a success. See the change. That which Theosophists hardly dared speak about with bated breath for fear of being called lunatics but a few years ago, is now being given out by lecturers, publicly advocated by mystical clergymen. While the Orthodox hasten to make away with the old hell and sapphire-paved New Jerusalem, the more liberal accept now under Christian veils and biblical nomenclature our doctrine of karma, reincarnation, and God as an abstract principle. Thus the Church is slowly drifting into philosophy and pantheism. Daily, we recognize some of our teachings creeping out as speculations religious, poetical, and even scientific, and these noticed with respect by the same papers which will neither admit their theosophical origin nor abstain from vilipending the very granary of such mystic ideas, the Theosophical Society. About a year ago a wise criticaster exclaimed in a paper we need not advertise, to show the utterly unscientific ideas with which the work, The Secret Doctrine, is crammed, it may be sufficient to point out that its author refuses belief in the existence of inorganic matter and endows atoms with intelligence. And today we find Edison's conception of matter quoted with approval and sympathy by London magazines from Harper's, in which we read, "I do not believe that matter is inert, acted upon by an outside force. To me it seems that every atom is possessed by a certain amount of primitive intelligence. Look at the 1,000 ways in which atoms of hydrogen combine with those of other elements. Do you mean to say they do this without intelligence?" Mr. Edison is a theosophist, though not a very active one. Still the very fact of his holding a diploma seems to inspire him with theosophical truths. Theosophists believe in reincarnation, say contemptuously our Christian enemies. We do not find one word ever said by our Savior that could be interpreted against the modern belief in reincarnation. Preaches the Reverend Mr. Bullard, thus half opening, and very wisely too, a back door for the day when this Buddhist-ical and Brahmanical inane belief will have become general. Theosophists believe that the earliest races of men were as ethereal as are now their astral doubles, and call them chayas, shadows. And now hear the English poet laureate singing in his last book, Demeter, and other poems, the ghost in man. The ghost that once was man, but cannot wholly free itself from men, are calling to each other through a dawn, stronger than earth has ever seen. The veil is rending, and the voices of the day are heard across the voices of the dark. No sudden heaven, nor sudden hell for man, a Aeonian evolution, swift or slow, through all the spheres an ever-opening height, an ever-lessening earth. This looks as if Lord Tennyson had read theosophical books, or is inspired by the same grand truths as we are. Oh, we hear some skeptics exclaiming, but there are poetical licenses. The writer does not believe a word of it. How do you know this? But even if it were so, here is one more proof of the cyclic evolution of our theosophical ideas, which, I hope, will not be dubbed, too much as clerical licenses. The most esteemed and sympathetic of London clergymen, the Reverend G. W. Allen, has just stepped into our theosophical shoes and followed our good example by founding a Bristow Theosophical Society. As its double title shows, its platform and program have to be necessarily more restricted and limited than our own, for in the words of its circular it is, only, intended to cover ground which the original or parent, society at present does not cover. However much our esteemed friend and co-worker in theosophy may be mistaken in believing that the teachings of the Theosophical Society do not cover esoteric Christianity as they do the esoteric aspect of all other world religions, yet his new society is sure to do 5. The italics are ours. Good work. 4. If the name chosen means anything at all, it means that the work and study of the members must of necessity be theosophical. The above is again proven by what the circular of the Christo-Theosophical Society states in the following words: it is believed that at the present day there are many persons who are dissatisfied with the crude and unphilosophic enunciation of Christianity put forward so often in sermons and theological writings. Some of these persons are impelled to give up all faith in Christianity, but many of them do this reluctantly, and would gladly welcome a presentation of the old truths which should show them to be in harmony with the conclusions of reason and the testimony of undeniable intuition. There are many others, also, whose only feeling is that the truths of their religion mean so very little to them practically, and have such very little power to influence and ennoble their daily life and character. To such persons the Christo-Theosophical Society makes its appeal, inviting them to join together in a common effort to discover that apprehension of Christian truth, and to attain that power, which must be able to satisfy the deep yearnings of the human heart, and give strength for self-mastery and a life lived for others. This is admirable, and shows plainly its purpose of countering the very pernicious influences of exoteric and dogmatic theology, and it is just what we have been trying to do all along. All similarity, however, stops here, as it has nothing to do, as it appears, with universal but only sectarian theosophy. We fear greatly that the C.T.S. by inviting to its membership those persons who, while desirous of apprehending ever more and more clearly the mysteries of divine truth, yet wish to retain as the foundation of their philosophy the Christian doctrines of God as the Father of all men, and Christ as his revelation of himself to mankind, limits thereby the mysteries of the divine truth to one single and the youngest of all religions, and avatars to but one man. We hope sincerely that the members of the Christo-Theosophical Society may be able to avoid this Charybdis without falling into Scylla. There is one more difficulty in our way, and we would humbly ask to have it explained to us. The Society, states the circular, is not made up of teachers and learners. We are all learners. This, with the hope distinctly expressed a few lines higher, that the members will gladly welcome a presentation of the old truths, in harmony with the conclusions of reason, etc., leads to a natural query, which of the learners is to present the said truths to the other learners. Then comes the unavoidable reasoning that whosoever the learner may be, no sooner he will begin his presentation than he will become nolens vos/ens a teacher. But this is, after all, a trifle. We feel too proud and too satisfied with the homage thus paid to Theosophy, and with the sight of a representative of the Anglican clergy following in our track, to find fault with details, or wish anything but good luck to the Christo-Theosophical Association. Lucifer, May 1889. Our cycle and the next the world's great age begins anew. The golden days return, the earth doth like a snake renew her winter weeds outworn. Shelley, my friend, the golden age hath passed away, only the good have power to bring it back. Goethe had the author of Prometheus Unbound in his mind's eye when writing about the return of the golden days, and the new beginning of the world's great age. As his poetical foresight carried his vision of the 19th century in Toth 119th, or has that vision revealed to him in gorgeous imagery the things to come which are the things that were? Fichte assures us it is a phenomenon of frequent occurrence, particularly in past ages, that what we shall become is pictured by something which we already have been, and that what we have to obtain is represented as something which we have formerly lost. And he adds, what Rousseau, under the name of Estate of Nature, and old poets by the tight-leafed golden age, place behind us, lies actually before us. Such is also Tennyson's idea, when he says, old writers pushed the happy seasons back, the more fools they we forward, dreamers both. Happy the optimist in whose heart the nightingale of hope can still sing, with all the iniquity and cold selfishness of the present age before his eyes. Our century is a boastful age, and proud as it is hypocritical, as cruel as it is dissembling. Oh yeah, gods, how dissembling and truly sacrilegious in the face of every truth, is this, our century, with all its boastful sanctimoniousness and cant. Verily, Pecksniffian ought to be thy name, O 19th of thy Christian series. For thou hast generated more hypocrites in a square yard of thy civilized soil than antiquity has bred of them on all its idolatrous lands during long ages. And thy modern Pecksniff, of both sexes, is so roughly impregnated with the spirit of falsehood that be is moral even in drunkenness and canting even in shame and discovery, in the words of the author of Martin Chuzzlewit. If true, how dreadful Fichte's statement! It is terrible beyond words. Shall we then expect at some future recurring cycle to become that which we already have been, or that which we are now? To obtain a glance into the future cycle we have thus but to examine the situation around us in the present day. What do we find? Instead of truth and sincerity, we have propriety and cold, cultured politeness, in one plain word, dissembling. Falsification on every plane, falsification of moral food and the same falsification of eatable food. Margarine butter for the soul, and margarine butter for the stomach, beauty and fresh colors without, and rottenness and corruption within. Life a long racecourse, a feverish chase, whose goal is a tower of selfish ambition, of pride and vanity, of greed for money or honors, and in which human passions are the horsemen, and our weaker brethren the steeds. At this terrible steeplechase the prize cup is purchased with the heart's blood and sufferings of countless fellow creatures, and won at the cost of spiritual self-degradation. Who, in this century, would presume to say what he thinks? It takes a brave man, nowadays, to speak the truth fearlessly, and even that at personal risk and cost. For the law forbids one saying the truth, except under compulsion, in its courts and under threat of perjury. Have lies told about you publicly and in print, and, unless you are wealthy, you are powerless to shut your calumniator's mouth, state facts, and you become a defamer, hold your tongue on some iniquity perpetrated in your presence, and your friends will hold you as a participator therein, a confederate. The expression of one's honest opinion has become impossible in this, our cycle. The just lost bill repealing the blasphemy laws, is a good proof in point. The Pall Mall Gaze she had, in its issue of April 13, some pertinent lines on the subject, its arguments, however, presenting but a one-sided view, and having, therefore, to be accepted cam grano salis. It reminds the reader that the true principle in the blasphemy laws was long ago laid down by Lord Macaulay, and adds, to express your own religious or irreligious opinions with the utmost possible freedom is one thing, to put forward your views offensively, so as to outrage and pain other people, is another thing. You may wear what clothes you please, or no clothes at all, in your own house, but if a man were to assert his right to walk down Regent Street clad solely in his shirt, the public would have a right to object. Suppose some zealous man were to placard all the hoardings of London with comic pictures of the crucifixion, that surely ought to be an offence, even in the eyes of those who do not believe the crucifixion ever happened. Just so. Be religious or irreligious, in our age, as much as you like, but do not be offensive, and dare not outrage and pain other people. Dus off/ja people mean here Christians only, no other persons being considered. Moreover, the margin thus left for the jury's opinion is ominously wide, for who knows where the line of demarcation is to be drawn. To be entirely impartial and fair in their verdict in these particular matters, the jury would have to be a mixed one and consist of 6 Christians and 6 infidels. Now we have been impressed in youth that Themis was a blindfolded goddess only in antiquity and among the heathen. Since then, Christianity and civilization having opened her eyes, the allegory allows now of 2 versions. But we try to believe the best of the 2 inferences, and thinking of law most reverentially, we come to the following conclusions: in law, that which is sauce for the goose must be sauce for the gander. Therefore, if administered on this principle, the blasphemy laws must prove most beneficent to all concerned, without distinction of race, color, or religion, as we say in Theosophy. Now, if law is equitable, it must apply impartially to all. Are we then to understand that it forbids to outrage and pain anyone's feelings, or simply those of the Christians? If the former, then it must include Theosophists, spiritualists, the many millions of heathens whom merciful fate has made Her Majesty's subjects, and even the freethinkers, and materialists, some of whom are very thin-skinned. It cannot mean the latter, i.e., limit the law to the God of the Christians alone, nor would we presume to suspect it of such a sinful bias. For blasphemy is a word applying not only to God, Christ and Holy Ghost, not merely to the Virgin and saints, but to every god or goddess. This term, with the same criminal sense attached to it, existed with the Greeks, the Romans, and with the older Egyptians ages before our era. Thou shalt not revile the gods, plural, stands out prominent in verse 28 of chapter XXII of Exodus, when God speaks out from Mount Sinai. So much admitted, what becomes of our friends, the missionaries? If enforced, the law does not promise them a very nice time of it. We pity them, with the blasphemy law suspended over their heads like a sword of Damocles, for, of all the foul-mouthed blasphemers against God and the gods of other nations, they are the foremost. Why should they be allowed to break the law against Vishnu, Durga, or any fetish, against Buddha, Muhammad, or even a spook, in whom a spiritualist sincerely recognizes his dead mother, any more than an infidel against Jehovah? In the eyes of law, Hanuman, the monkey god, has to be protected as much as any of the Trinitarian godheads. Otherwise law would be more blindfolded than ever. Moreover, besides his sacredness in the eyes of the teeming millions of India, Hanuman is no less dear to the sensitive hearts of Darwinists, and blasphemy against our first cousin, the tailless baboon, is certain to hurt the feelings of Messrs. Grant Allen and Aveling, as much as those of many Hindu Theosophists. We grant that he who makes comic pictures of the crucifixion, commits an offense against the law. But so does he who ridicules Krishna, and misunderstanding the allegory of his gopi, shepherdesses, speaks foully of him before Hindus. And how about the profane and vulgar jokes uttered from the pulpit by some ministers of the Gospels themselves, not about Krishna, but Christ himself? And here steps in the comical discrepancy between theory and practice, between the dead and living letter of the law. We know of several most offensively comic preachers, but have hitherto found infidels and atheists alone sternly reproving for it those sinning Christian ministers, whether in England or America. The world upside down. Profane blasphemy charged upon gospel preachers, the orthodox press keeping silent about it, and an agnostic alone raising his voice against such clownish proceedings. It is certain that we find more truth in own paragraph op Saladin's 1-2 writings than in half the daily papers of the United Kingdom, more of reverential and true feeling, to whatsoever applied, and more of fine sense for the fitness of things in the little finger of that infidel, than in all the burly, boisterous figure of the Reverend Mr. Spurgeon. One is an agnostic, a scoffer at the Bible he is called, the other a famous Christian preacher. But karma having naught to do with the dead letter of human laws, of civilization, or progress, provides on our spinning ball of mud an antidote for every evil, hence a truth-worshipping infidel, for every money-making preacher who desecrates his gods. America has its Talmage, described very properly by the New York Sun 3 as a gibbering charlatan, and its Colonel Robert Ingersoll. In England Talmage's imitators find a stern nemesis in Saladin. The Yankee preacher was more than once severely taken to task by infidel papers for leading his flock to heaven not in a reverential spirit, but trying to shorten the long and tedious journey with sundry biblical anecdotes. Who in New York has forgotten the farce pantomime performed by Talmage on April 15, 1877? We remember it well. His subject was the trio of Bethany, when each of the three dramatis personae was mimicked to perfection, as declared by the congregation. Jesus was shown by the Reverend Harlequin, making a morning calpee on Mary and Martha, throwing himself on an ottoman, then taking up the time of Mary the lover of ethics, who sat at his feet, and finding himself blown up for this, sick, by Martha, left to serve alone. Colonel Sandys said the other day in the House of Commons in his speech on Mr. Bradlauggh's blasphemy bill which he opposed, that while we punished those who killed the body, the object of the bill was to allow those who would murder the souls of men to do so with impunity. Does he think that making fun of sacred beliefs by a Christian preacher fills the souls of his listeners with reverence, and murders one the fine poet and witty editor of the late Secular Review, now the Agnostic Journal? The works of Mr. W. Stuart Ross, Saladin, e.g., Woman, Her Glory, Her Shame, and Her God, miscellaneous pamphlets, God and His Book, etc., will become in the XXth century the most powerful as the most complete vindication of every man and woman called infidel in the XIXTH. To the Sun of April 6, 1877. It only when that fun comes from an infidel? The same pious commoner reminded the House that, under the law of Moses, those who committed blasphemy were to be taken out of the camp and stoned to death. We have not the slightest objection to Protestant fanatics of the Mosaic persuasion, taking the Talmages and Spurgeons, and stoning them to death. We will not even stop to inquire of such a modern Saul, why blame in such a case the Pharisees for acting on that same Mosaic law and crucifying his Christ, or certain of the synagogue of the Libertines for stoning Stephen. But we will simply state this: if justice, like charity, does not stop at home, such unfairness as freethinkers, agnostics, theosophists, and other infidels receive generally at the hands of law, will be a subject of the scorn for future history. For history repeats itself. Spurgeon having poked fun at Paul's miracles, we recommend every fair-minded person to procure the Agnostic Journal of April 13, and read Saladin's article at random, devoted to that favorite preacher. If they would find out the reason why, day by day, religious feeling is dying out in this country, murdered as it is in Christian souls, let them read it. Reverence is replaced by emotionalism. The Salvationists glorifying Christ on the light fantastic toe, and Spurgeon's tabernacle is all that remains in this Christian land of the Sermon on the Mount. Crucifixion and Calvary are solely represented by that weird combination of hellfire and Punch and Judy show, which is preeminently Mr. Spurgeon's religion. Who, then, will find these lines by Saladin too strong? Edward Irving was a severe mystic and volcanic Elijah. Charles Spurgeon is a grinning and exoteric Grimaldi. Newly returned from Mentone and gout, he presided over the annual meeting of the Metropolitan Tabernacle Church Auxiliary, held in the Tabernacle. At the commencement of the proceedings he remarked to those about to pray, "Now, it is a cold night, and, if anybody prays very long, somebody will be frozen to death." Laughter. I remember that Paul preached a long sermon once, and a young man tumbled out of a window and killed himself. If anybody gets frozen tonight, I am not like Paul, and cannot restore him, so please don't render a miracle necessary, as I cannot perform it. Laughter. Such a jester as this, if he had been alive and in Palestine, contemporary with the blessed Lord, out of whom he makes such a prophet, would have poked the blessed Lord jocularly in the ribs with a "Well, and how are you, old boy from Nazareth?" There would have been Judas, called Iscariot, who carried the bag, and Charles, called Spurgeon, who wore the cap. And bells. I make light of the Galilean fables, because to me they are simply fables, but to Mr. Spurgeon they are the very word of very God, and it is not for him to make light of them, even to please the holy mediocrites of the tabernacle. One venture to recommend to Mr. Spurgeon's devout attention a sentiment to be found in Cicero's De Legibus, and which runs thus: De sacri autem hexit una sententia, ut conserventur. As Mr. Spurgeon has all his life been so prayerfully absorbed that he has had no time for study and knows no language save a voluble gush of washerwoman English, I may tell him and his that the words mean. But let us all concur in this one sentiment, that things sacred be inviolate. AGN. Journal, April 13. Amen, we utter, from the bottom of our soul, to this noble advice. But his pen is dipped in sacrilegious gall, we heard a clergyman say to us the other day, speaking of Saladin. We answered. But his is a diamond pen, and the gall of his irony is clear as crystal, free as it is from any other desire than to deal justly and speak the truth. In view of the blasphemy law remaining on hand, and the equitable law of this country which makes a libel more libelous in proportion to the truth it contains, and especially with an eye to the pecuniary ruin which it entails upon at least one of the parties, there is more heroism and fearless self-abnegation in speaking the truth, pro bono publico, than in pandering to public hobbies. With the exception, perhaps, of the brave and outspoken editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, there is no writer in England whom we respect more for such noble-minded fearlessness, and none whose fine wit we admire more than Saladin's. But the world, in our day, judges everything on appearance. Motives are held as of no account, and the materialistic tendency is foremost in condemning a priori that which clashes with skin-deep propriety and encrusted notions. Nations, men, and ideas all are judged according to our preconceptions, and the lethal emanations of modern civilization kill all goodness and truth. As observed by St. George's, the savage races are fast disappearing, killed by the mere contact of civilized man. No doubt, it must be a consolation to the Hindu and even the Zulu, to think that all their surviving brethren will die, thanks to the missionary effort, linguists and scholars, if not Christians. A Theosophist, a colonist born in Africa, was telling us the other day that a Zulu had offered himself to him as a boy. This Kaffir was a graduate of a college, a Latin, Greek, Hebrew and English scholar. Found unable with all these achievements to cook a dinner or clean boots, the gentleman had to send him away, probably to starve. All this has inflated the European with pride. But, as says again the above-quoted writer, he forgets that Africa is fast becoming Mussulman, and that Islam, a kind of granite block which in its powerful cohesion defies the force of the waves and winds, is refractory to European ideas, which, so far, have never seriously affected it. Europe may yet awaken one day to find itself Mussulman, if not in durance vile to the heathen chinny. But when the inferior races have all died out, who, or what shall replace them in the cycle that is to mirror our own? There are those, also, who with a superficial eye to ancient as also to modern history slight and disparage everything ever achieved in antiquity. We remember reading about heathen priesthoods, who built proud towers, instead of emancipating degraded savages. The Magi of Babylon were contrasted with the poor Patagonians and other Christian missions, the former coming out second best in every such comparison. To this it may be answered that if the ancients built proud towers, so do the moderns, witness, the present Parisian craze, the Eiffel Tower. How many human lives the ancient towers cost, no one can tell, but the Eiffel, unfinished as it is, has cost in the first year of its existence over 100 workmen killed. Between the latter and the Babylonian tower, the palm of superiority in usefulness belongs berites to the/G/W/AR, the planet tower of Nebo's temple of Borsippa. Between a proud tower built to the national god of wisdom, and another proud tower constructed to attract the children of folly, unless it is urged that even modern folly is superior to ancient wisdom, there is room for a diversity of opinions. Furthermore, it is to Chaldean astrology that modern astronomy owes its progress, and it is the astronomical calculations oft Magithot becometh the groundwork of our present mathematical astronomy and have guided discoverers in their researches. As to missions, whether to Patagonia or Annam, Africa or Asia, it is still an open question with the unprejudiced, whether they are a benefit or an evil which Europe confers on the degraded savages. We seriously doubt whether the benighted heathen would not profit more by being left severely alone than by being made, in addition to treason to their earlier beliefs, acquainted with the blessings of rum, whiskey, and the various ensuing diseases which generally appear in the trail of European missionaries. Every sophistry notwithstanding, a moderately honest heathen is nearer the kingdom of heaven than a lying, thieving, rascally Christian convert. And since he is assured that his robes, i.e., crimes, are washed in the blood of Jesus, and is told of God's greater joy over one sinner that repenteth than over 99 sinless saints, neither he, nor we, can see why the convert should not profit by the opportunity. Who, asks E. Young, gave in antiquity 20 millions, not at the bidding of an imperious monarch or a tyrannical priesthood, but at the spontaneous call of the national conscience and by the immediate instrumentality of the national will, the writer adding, that in this money grant there is a moral grandeur that sinks the pyramids into littleness. Oh, the pride and the conceit of this our age! We do not know. Had each of the subscribers to this money grant given his widows 2 mites, they might claim collectively to have Kasra more than all, more than any other nation, and await their reward. England being, however, the wealthiest nation in the world, the intrinsic merits of the case seem slightly altered. 20 millions in a lump represent indeed a mighty engine for good. But such a money grant could only gain in karma, were it to pander less to national pride, and were the nation not to feel itself so exalted for it, in the 4 quarters of the globe, by 100-voiced fame trumpeted by public organs. True charity opens her purse strings with an invisible hand, and, finishing its act, exists no more. It shuns fame, and is never ostentatious. Besides which, everything is relative. 1 million in specie, 3,000 years ago, represented tenfold more than 20 millions today. 20 millions are a Niagara inundating with titanic force some popular want, and creating, for the time being, as great a commotion. But, while helping for a certain lapse of time tens of thousands of hungry wretches, even such an enormous sum leaves 10 times as many unfortunate, starving wretches still unrelieved. To such munificent bounties we prefer countries where there are no needy people at all, e.g. those small communities, the remnants of once mighty races, which allow no beggars among their co-religionists, we mean the Parsis. Under the Indian and Buddhist kings, like Chandragupta and Asoka, people did not wait, as they do now, for a national calamity, to throw the surplus of their overflowing wealth at the head of a portion of the starving and the homeless, but work steadily on, century after century, building rest houses, digging wells, and planting fruit trees along the roads, wherein the weary pilgrim and the penniless traveler could always find rest and shelter, be fed and receive hospitality at the national expense. A little clear stream of cold, healthy water which runs steadily, and is ever ready to refresh parched lips, is more beneficent than the sudden torrent that breaks the dam of national indifference, now and then, by fits and starts. Thus, if we have to become in the future cycle that which we already have been, let this be as in the days of Asoka, not as it is now. But we are reproached with forgetting Christian heroism. Where will you find, we are asked, a parallel to the heroism of the early martyrs and that displayed in our day? We are sorry to contradict this boast like many others. If casual instances of heroism in our century are undeniable, who, on the other hand, dreads death more, as a general rule, than the Christian, the idolater, the Hindu, and the Buddhist, in short every Asiatic or African, dies with an indifference and serenity unknown to our Western man. As for Christian heroism, whether we mean medieval or modern heroes or heroines, a St. Louis, or a General Gordon, a Joan of Arc, or a Nightingale, there is no need of the adjective to emphasize the substantive. The Christian martyrs were preceded by the idolatrous and even godless Spartans of many virtues, the brave sisters of the Red Cross by the matrons of Rome and Greece. To this day, the daily self-tortures submitted to by the Indian yogi and the Mussulman fakir, tortures often lasting through years, throw entirely into the shadow the unavoidable heroism of Christian martyr, ancient or modern. He who would learn the full meaning of the word heroism must read the Annals of Rajasthan by Colonel Todd. Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's, is a golden rule, but like so many others from the same source, Christians are the first to break it. Pride and conceit are the two hideous cancers devouring the heart of civilized nations, and selfishness is the sword handled by evanescent personality to sever the golden thread that links it to immortal individuality. Old Juvenal must have been a prophet. It is our century that he addresses when saying, "We own thy merits, but we blame beside thy mind elate with insolence and pride." Pride is the first enemy to itself. Unwilling to hear any one praised in its presence, it falls foul of every rival and does not always come out victorious. I am the one, and God's elect, says the proud nation. I am the invincible and the foremost, tremble all ye around me. Behold, there comes a day when we see it crouching in the dust, bleeding and mangled. I am the one, croaks the private crow in peacock's feathers. I am the one painter, artist, writer, or what not par excellence. On whomsoever one shed my light he is singled out by the nations, on whomsoever I turn my back, he is doomed to contempt and oblivion. Vain conceit and glorification. In the law of karma as in the truths we find in the Gospels, he who is the first will be the last hereafter. There are those writers whose thoughts, however distasteful to the bigoted majority, will survive many generations, others which, however brilliant and original, will be rejected in the future. Cycles. Moreover, as the cowl does not make the monk, so the external excellence of a thing does not guarantee the moral beauty of its workman, whether in art or literature. Some of the most eminent poets, philosophers, and authors were historically immoral. Rousseau's ethics did not prevent his nature being far from perfect. Edgar Poe is said to have written his best poems in a state verging on delirium tremens. George Sand, her magnificent psychological insight, the high moral character of her heroines, and her elevated ideas notwithstanding, could have never claimed the Montaigne Prize for virtue. Talent, moreover, and especially genius, are no development of anyone's present life, of which one ought to feel personally proud, but the fruition of a previous existence, and its illusions are dangerous. Maya, say the Orientals, spreads its thickest and most deceitful veils over the most lovely spots and objects in nature. The most beautiful serpents are the most venomous. The upas tree, whose deadly atmosphere kills every living thing that approaches it, is the queen of beauty in the African forests. Shall we expect the same in the coming cycle? Are we doomed to the same evils then that befall us now? Nevertheless, and though Fichte's speculation will have proved correct and Shelley's golden age will have dawned upon mankind, still karma will have its usual way. For we shall have become the ancients in our turn, for those who will come long after us. The men of that period will also believe themselves tunly perfect beings and show scorn to the Eiffel as we show scorn to the Babel Tower. Slaves to the routine, the established opinions of the day, what they of the next cycle will say and do, will alone be well said and done. Wolf, wolf, will be the cry raised against those who, as we defend the ancients now, will attempt to say a good word for us. And forthwith the finger of scorn and every weapon available will be directed at him who falls off from the beaten track, and at the blasphemers who may dare to call by their right namest gods of that cycle, and presume to defend their own ideals. What biographies shall be written of the famous infidels of today, one can foresee in reading those of some of England's best poets, e.g., the posthumous opinions passed on Percy Bysshe Shelley. Yeah, he is now accused of what he would have otherwise been praised for, because, forsooth, he wrote in his boyhood a defense of atheism /ergo, his imagination is said to have carried him beyond the bounds of reality, and his metaphysics are said to be without a solid foundation of reason. This amounts to saying that his critics alone know all about the landmarks placed by nature between the real and the unreal. This kind of orthodox trigonometrical surveyors of the absolute, who claim to be theonly specialists chosen by their God for the setting of boundaries and who are ever ready to sit in judgment over independent metaphysicians, are a feature of our century. In Shelley's case, the metaphysics of the young author of Queen Mab, described in popular encyclopedias as a violent and blasphemous attack on Christianity and Thebiable, must, of course, have appeared to his infallible judges without a solid foundation in reason. For them, that foundation is in the motto of Tertullian, Credo quia absurdium est. Poor, great young Shelley. He who labored so zealously for several years of his too short life in relieving the poor and consoling the distressed, and who, according to Medwin, would have given his last sixpence to a stranger in want, he is called an atheist for refusing to accept the Bible literally. We find, perhaps, a reason for this atheism in the Conversations lexicon, in which Shelley's immortal name is followed bethought of Shem, the eldest son of Noah. Said in Scripture to have died at the age of 600 years. The writer of this encyclopedic information, quoted by us verbatim, had just indulged in saying that the censure of extreme presumption can hardly be withheld from a writer who, in his youth, rejects all established opinions, such as Bible chronology we suppose. But the same writer passes without a word of comment and in prudent, if not reverential, silence, the cyclic years of Shem, as indeed he may. Such is our century, so noisily, but happily for all preparing for its final leap into eternity. Of all past centuries, it is the most smilingly cruel, wicked, immoral, boastful and incongruous. Idest hybrid and unnatural production, the monstrous child of its parents and honest mother called medieval superstition and a dishonest, humbugging father, a profligate impostor, universally known as modern civilization. This unpaired, odd team which now drags the car of progress through the triumphal arches of our civilization, suggests strange thoughts. Our oriental turn of mind makes us think, as we gaze at this orthodox piety harnessed together with cool sneering materialism, o fitting symbol for our century. We choose it in the colonial production of European ethics, alas, living productions, known as the half-castes. We fancy a coffee-colored, oily face, looking insolently at the world through an eyeglass. A flat and woolly head, surmounted by a tall hat, enthroned on a pedestal of white starched collar, shirt, and fashionable satin cravat. Leaning on the arm of this hybrid product ion, the flat swarthy visage of a mongrel beauty shines under a Parisian bonnet, a pyramid of gauze, gay ribbons, and plumes. Indeed, This combination of Asiatic flesh and European array is no more ludicrous than the bird's-eye view of the moral and intellectual amalgamation of ideas and views as now accepted. Mr. Huxley and the Woman Clothed with the Sun, the Royal Society and the New Prophet of Brighton, who lays letters before the Lord and has messages for us in reply from Jehovah of Hosts, who signs himself, unblusheringly, King Solomon on letters stamped with the heading, Sanctuary of Jehovah, sick, and calls the mother, the said solar woman, that accursed thing and an abomination. Yet their teachings are all authoritative and orthodox. Just fancy Mr. Grant Allen trying to persuade General Booth that life owes its origin to the chemically separative action of ethereal undulations on the cooled surface of the earth, especially carbonic anhydride and water, and L.E. Brobb, General of England, arguing that this cannot be so, since this cooled surface was only called into being 4004 BC, thence, that his, Grant Allen's, existing diversity of organic forms was not in the least due, Ash's new book would make the unwary believe, to the minute interaction of dynamic laws, but to the dust-off ground, from which the Lord God formed the beast of the field and every fowl of the air. These two are the representatives of the goats and the sheep on the day of judgment, the Alpha and the Omega of orthodox and correct society in our century. The unfortunates squeezed on the neutral line between these two are steadily kicked and butted by both. Emotionalism and conceit, one, a nervous disease, the other that feeling which prompts us to swim with the current if we would not pass for retrograde fogies, or infidels, are the powerful weapons in the hands of our pious modern sheep and our learned goats. How many swell the respective ranks merely owing to one or the other of these feelings, is known to their karma alone. Those who are not to be moved by either hysterical emotion or a holy fear of the multitudes and propriety, those, whom the voice of their conscience, that still small voice which, when heard, deafens the mighty roar of the Niagara Falls itself and will not permit them to lie to their own souls, remain outside. For these there is no hope in this departing age, and they may as well give up all expectation. They are born out of due time. Such is the terrible picture presented by our present cycle, now nearing its close, to those from whose eyes the scales of prejudice, preconception, and partiality have fallen, and who see the truth that lies behind the deceptive appearances of our Western civilization. But what has the new cycle in store for humanity? Will it be merely a continuation of the present, only in darker and more terrible colors? Or shall a new day dawn for mankind, a day of pure sunlight, of truth, of charity, of true happiness for all? The answer depends mainly on the few Theosophists who, true to their colors through good repute and ill, still fight the battle of truth against the powers of darkness. An infidel paper contains some optimistic words. The Last Prophecy by Victor Hugo, who is alleged to have said this: for 400 years the human race has not made a step but what has left its plain vestige behind. We enter now upon great centuries. The 16th century will be known as the age of painters, the 17th will be termed the age of writers, the 18th the age of philosophers, the 19th the age of apostles and prophets. To satisfy the 19th century it is necessary to be the painter of the 16th, the writer of the 17th, the philosopher of the 18th, and it is also necessary, like Louis Blanc, to have the innate and holy love of humanity which constitutes an apostolate, and opens up a prophetic vista into the future. In the 20th, war will be dead, the scaffold will be dead, animosity will be dead, royalty will be dead, and dogmas will be dead, but man will live. For all, there will be but one country, that country the whole earth. For all, there will be but one hope, that hope the whole heaven. All hail, then, to that noble 20th century which shall own our children, and which our children shall inherit. If Theosophy prevailing in the struggle, its all-embracing philosophy strikes deep root into the minds and hearts of men, if its doctrines of reincarnation and karma, in other words, of hope and responsibility, find a home in the lives of the new generations, then, indeed, will dawn the day of joy and gladness for all who now suffer and are outcast. For real Theosophy is altruism, and we cannot repeat it too often. It is brotherly love, mutual help, unswerving devotion to truth. If once men do but realize that in these allen can true happiness be found, and never in wealth, possessions, or any selfish gratification, then the dark clouds will roll away, and a new humanity will be born upon earth. Then, the golden age will be there, indeed. But if not, then the storm will burst, and our boasted Western civilization and enlightenment will sink in such a sea of horror that its parallel history has never yet recorded. Lucifer, June 1888. Karmic Visions. Oh, sad no more. Oh, sweet no more. Oh, strange no more. By a mossed brook bank on a stone I smelt a wild weed flower alone, there was a ringing in my ears. And both my eyes gushed out with tears. Surely all pleasant things had gone before. Low buried fathom deep beneath with thee, no more. Tennyson, The Gem, 1831, a camp filled with war chariots, neighing horses, and legions of long-haired soldiers. A regal tent, gaudy in its barbaric splendor. Its linen walls are weighed down under the burden of Eris. In its center a raised seat covered with skins, and on it a stalwart, savage-looking warrior. He passes in review prisoners of war brought in turn before him, who are disposed of according to the whim of the heartless despot. A new captive is now before him, and is addressing him with passionate earnestness. As he listens to her with suppressed passion in his manly, but fierce, cruel face, the balls of his eyes become bloodshot and roll with fury. And as he bends forward with fierce stare, his whole appearance, his matted locks hanging over the frowning brow, his big-boned body with strong sinews, and the two large hands resting on the shield placed upon the right knee justifies the remark made in hardly audible whisper by a gray-headed soldier to his neighbor, "Little mercy shall the holy prophetess receive at the hand of Clovis." The captive, who stands between two Burgundian warriors, facing the ex-prince of the Salians, now king of all the Franks, is an old woman with silver-white disheveled hair, hanging over her skeleton-like shoulders. In spite of her great age, her tall figure is erect, and the inspired black eyes look proudly and fearlessly into the cruel face of the treacherous son of Gilderic. King, she says, in a loud, ringing voice. Thou art great and mighty now, but thy days are numbered, and thou shalt reign but 3 summers longer. Wicked thou wert born. Perfidious thou art to thy friends and allies, robbing more than one of his lawful crown. Murderer of thy next of kin, thou who addest to the knife and spear in open warfare, dagger, poison, and treason, beware how thou dealest with the servant of Nerthus. Ha ha. Old hag of hell, chuckles the king, with an evil, ominous sneer. Thou hast crawled out of the entrails of thy mother goddess, truly. Thou fearest not my wrath? It is well. But little need I fear thine empty imprecations. I a baptized Christian. So, repliest Sibyl. All know that Clovis has abandoned the gods of his fathers, that he has lost all faith in the warning voice of the white horse of the sun, and that out of fear of the Alemanni he went serving on his knees Remigius, the servant of the Nazarene, at Rheims. But hast thou become any truer in thy new faith? Hast thou not murdered in cold blood all thy brethren who trusted in thee, after, as well as before, thy apostasy? Hast not thou plighted troth to Alaric, the king of the West Goths, and hast thou not killed him by stealth, running thy spear into his back, while he was bravely fighting an enemy? And is it thy new faith and thy new gods that teach thee to be devising in thy black soul even now foul means against Theodoric, who put thee down? Beware, Clovis, beware. For now the gods of thy fathers have risen against thee. Beware, I say, for woman, fiercely cries the king. Woman, cease thy insane talk and answer my question. Where is the treasure of the grove amassed by thy priests of Satan, and hidden after they had been driven away by the holy cross? Thou alone knowest. Answer, or by heaven and hell I shall thrust thy evil tongue down thy throat forever. She heeds not the threat, but goes on calmly and fearlessly as before, as if she had not heard. The gods say, Clovis, thou art accursed. Clovis, thou shalt be reborn among thy present enemies, and suffer the tortures one the nourishing, tacit, germ. 11. The earth, a mother goddess, the most beneficent deity of the ancient Germans. Thou hast inflicted upon thy victims. All the combined power and glory thou hast deprived them of shall be thine in prospect, yet thou shalt never reach it. Thou shalt. The prophetess never finishes her sentence. With a terrible oath the king, crouching like a wild beast on his skin-covered seat, pounces upon her with the leap of a jaguar, and with one blow fells her to the ground. And as he lifts his sharp murderous spear, the Holy One of the sun-worshipping tribe makes the air ring with a last imprecation. I curse thee, enemy of Nerthus. May my agony be tenfold thine. May the great law avenge. The heavy spear falls, and, running through the victim's throat, nails the head to the ground. A stream of hot crimson blood gushes from the gaping wound and covers king and soldiers with indelible gore. Time the landmark of gods and men in the boundless field of eternity, the murderer of its offspring and of memory in mankind, time moves on with noiseless, incessant step through eons and ages. Among millions of other souls, a soul ego is reborn, for will or for woe, who know it? Captive in its new human form, it grows with it, and together they become, at last, conscious of their existence. Happy are the years of their blooming youth, unclouded with want or sorrow. Neither knows aught of the past nor of the future. For them all is the joyful present, for the soul ego is unaware that it had ever lived in other human tabernacles, it knows not that it shall be again reborn, and it takes no thought of the morrow. Its form is calm and content. It has hitherto given its soul ego no heavy troubles. Its happiness is due to the continuous mild serenity of its temper, to the affection it spreads wherever it goes. For it is a noble form, and its heart is full of benevolence. Never has the form startled its soul ego with a too violent shock, or otherwise disturbed the calm placidity of its tenant. 20 years glide by like one short pilgrimage, a long walk through the sunlit paths of life, hedged by ever-blooming roses with no thorns. The rare sorrows that befall the twin pair, form and soul, appear to them rather like the pale light of the cold northern moon, whose beams throw into a deeper shadow all around the moonlit objects, than as the blackness of night, the night of hopeless sorrow and despair. Son of a prince, born to rule himself one day his father's kingdom, surrounded from his cradle by reverence and honors, deserving of the universal respect and sure of the love of all, what could the soul ego desire more from the form it dwelt in? And so the soul ego goes on enjoying existence in its tower of strength, gazing quietly at the panorama of life ever changing before its two windows, the two kind blue eyes of a loving and good man. 1 day an arrogant and boisterous enemy threatens the father's kingdom, and the savage instincts of the warrior of old awaken in the soul ego. It leaves its dreamland amid the blossoms of life and causes its ego of clay to draw the soldier's blade, assuring him it is in defense of his country. Prompting each other to action, they defeat the enemy and cover themselves with glory and pride. They make the haughty foe bite the dust at their feet in supreme humiliation. For this they are crowned by history with the unfading laurels of valor, which are those of success. They make a footstool of the fallen enemy and transform their sire's little kingdom into a great empire. Satisfied they could achieve no more for the present, they return to seclusion and to the dreamland of their sweet home. For 3 lustra more the soul ego sits at its usual post, beaming out of its window on the world around. Over its head the sky is blue and the vast horizons are covered with those seemingly unfading flowers that grow in the sunlight of health and strength. All looks fair as a verdant mead in spring, for but an evil day comes to all in the drama of being. It waits through the life of king and of beggar. It leaves traces on the history of every mortal born from woman, and it can neither be scared away, entreated, nor propitiated. Health is a dewdrop that falls from the heavens to vivify the blossoms on earth only during the morn of life, its spring and summer. It has but a short duration and returns from whence it came, the invisible realms. How oft 'neath the bud that is brightest and fairest, the seeds of the canker in embryo lurk. How oft at the root of the flower that is rarest secure in its ambush the worm is at work. The running sand which moves downward in the glass, wherein the hours of human life are numbered, runs swifter. The worm has gnawed the blossom of health through its heart. The strong body is found stretched one day on the thorny bed of pain. The soul ego beams no longer. It sits still and looks sadly out of what has become its dungeon windows, on the world which is now rapidly being shrouded for it in the funeral palls of suffering. Is it the eve of night eternal which is nearing? Beautiful are the resorts on the midland sea. An endless line of surf-beaten, black, ragged rocks stretches, hemmed in between the golden sands of the coast and the deep blue waters of the Gulf. They offer their granite breast to the fierce blows of the northwest wind and thus protect the dwellings of the rich that nestle at their foot on the inland side. The half-ruined cottages on the open shore are the insufficient shelter of the poor. Their squalid bodies are often crushed under the walls torn and washed down by wind and angry wave. But they only follow the great law of the survival of the fittest. Why should they be protected? Lovely is the morning when the sun dawns with golden amber tints and its first rays kiss the cliffs of the beautiful shore. Glad is the song of the lark, as, emerging from its warm nest of herbs, it drinks the morning dew from the deep flower cups, when the tip of the rosebud thrills under the caress of the first sunbeam, and earth and heaven smile in mutual greeting. Sad is the soul ego alone as it gazes on awakening nature from the high couch opposite the large bay window. How calm is the approaching noon as the shadow creeps steadily on the sundial towards the hour of rest. Now the hot sun begins to melt the clouds in the limpid air and the last shreds of the morning mist that lingers on the tops of the distant hills vanish in it. All nature is prepared to rest at the hot and lazy hour of midday. The feathered tribes cease their song, their soft, gaudy wings droop, and they hang their drowsy heads, seeking refuge from the burning heat. A morning lark is busy nestling in the bordering bushes under the clustering flowers of the pomegranate and the sweet bay of the Mediterranean. The active songster has become voiceless. Its voice will resound as joyfully again tomorrow, sighs the soul ego, as it listens to the dying buzzing of the insects on the verdant turf. Shall ever mine? And now the flower-scented breeze hardly stirs the languid heads of the luxuriant plants. A solitary palm tree, growing out of the cleft of a moss-covered rock, next catches the eye of the soul ego. Its once upright, cylindrical trunk has been twisted out of shape and half broken by the nightly blasts of the northwest winds. And as it stretches wearily its drooping feathery arms, sway to and fro in the blue pellucid air, its body trembles and threatens to break in two at the first new gust that may arise. And then, the severed part will fall into the sea, and the once stately palm will be no more, soliloquizes the soul ego as it gazes sadly out of its windows. Everything returns to life in the cool, old bower at the hour of sunset. The shadows on the sundial become with every moment thicker, and animate nature awakens busier than ever in the cooler hours of approaching night. Birds and insects chirrup and buzz their last evening hymns around the tall and still powerful form, as it paces slowly and wearily along the gravel walk. And now its heavy gaze falls wistfully on the azure bosom of the tranquil sea. The gulf sparkles like a gem-studded carpet of blue velvet in the farewell dancing sunbeams, and smiles like a thoughtless, drowsy child, weary of tossing about. Further on, calm and serene in its perfidious beauty, the open sea stretches far and wide the smooth mirror of its cool waters salt and bitter as human tears. It lies in its treacherous repose like a gorgeous, sleeping monster, watching over the unfathomed mystery of its dark abysses. Truly the monumentless cemetery of the millions sunk in its depths. Without a grave, unknown, uncoffined, and unknown. While the sorry relic of the once noble form pacing yonder, once that its hour strikes and the deep-voiced bells toll the knell for the departed soul, shall be laid out in state and pomp. Its dissolution will be announced by millions of trumpet voices. Kings, princes, and the mighty ones of the earth will be present at its obsequies, or will send their representatives with sorrowful faces and condoling messages to those left behind. 1 point gained, over those uncoffined and unknown, is the bitter reflection of the soul ego. Thus glides past one day after the other, and as swift-winged time urges his flight, every vanishing hour destroying some thread in the tissue of life, the soul ego is gradually transformed in its views of things and men. Flitting between two eternities, far away from its birthplace, solitary among its crowd of physicians and attendants, the form is drawn with every day nearer to its spirit soul. Another light unapproached and unapproachable in days of joy, softly descends upon the weary prisoner. It sees now that which it had never perceived before. 6. How grand, how mysterious are the spring nights on the seashore when the winds are chained and the elements lulled. A solemn silence reigns in nature. Alone the silvery, scarcely audible ripple of the wave, as it runs caressingly over the moist sand, kissing shells and pebbles on its up and down journey, reaches the ear like the regular soft breathing of a sleeping bosom. How small, how insignificant and helpless feels man, during these quiet hours, as he stands between the two gigantic magnitudes, the star-hung dome above, and the slumbering earth below. Heaven and earth are plunged in sleep, but their souls are awake, and they confabulate, whispering one to the other mysteries unspeakable. It is then that the occult side of nature lifts her dark veils for us, and reveals secrets we would vainly seek to extort from her during the day. The firmament, so distant, so far away from earth, now seems to approach and bend over her. The sidereal meadows exchange embraces with their more humble sisters of the earth, the daisy-decked valleys and the green slumbering fields. The heavenly dome falls prostrate into the arms of the great quiet sea, and the millions of stars that stud the former peep into and bathe in every lakelet and pool. To the grief-furrowed soul those twinkling orbs are the eyes of angels. They look down with ineffable pity on the suffering of mankind. It is not the night dew that falls on the sleeping flowers, but sympathetic tears that drop from those orbs, at the sight of the great human sorrow. Yes, sweet and beautiful is a southern night. But when silently we watch the bed, by the taper's flickering light, when all we love is fading fast, how terrible is night. 7. Another day is added to the series of buried days. The far green hills, and the fragrant boughs of the pomegranate blossom have melted in the mellow shadows of the night, and both sorrow and joy are plunged in the lethargy of soul-resting sleep. Every noise has died out in the royal gardens, and no voice or sound is heard in that overpowering stillness. Swift-winged dreams descend from the laughing stars in motley crowds, and landing upon the earth disperse among mortals and immortals, amid animals and men. They hover over the sleepers, each attracted by its affinity and kind, dreams of joy and hope, balmy and innocent visions, terrible and awesome sights seen with sealed eyes, sensed by the soul, some instilling happiness and consolation, others causing sobs to heave the sleeping bosom, tears and mental torture, all and one preparing unconsciously to the sleepers their waking thoughts of the morrow. Even in sleep the soul ego finds no rest. Hot and feverish its body tosses about in restless agony. For it, the time of happy dreams is now a vanished shadow, a long bygone recollection. Through the mental agony of the soul, there lies a transformed man. Through the physical agony of the frame, there flutters in it a fully awakened soul. The veil of illusion has fallen off from the cold idols of the world, and the vanities and emptiness of fame and wealth stand bare, often hideous, before its eyes. The thoughts of the soul fall like dark shadows on the cogitative faculties of the fast disorganizing body, haunting the thinker daily, nightly, hourly. The sight of his snorting steed pleases him no longer. The recollections of guns and banners wrested from the enemy, of cities razed, of trenches, cannons and tents, of an array of conquered spoils now stirs but little his national pride. Such thoughts move him no more, and ambition has become powerless to awaken in his aching heart the haughty recognition of any valorous deed of chivalry. Visions of another kind now haunt his weary days and long sleepless nights. What he now sees is a throng of bayonets clashing against each other in a mist of smoke and blood, thousands of mangled corpses covering the ground, torn and cut to shreds by the murderous weapons devised by science and civilization, blessed to success by the servants of his God. What he now dreams of are bleeding, wounded and dying men, with missing limbs and matted locks, wet and soaked through with gore. A hideous dream detaches itself from a group of passing visions, and alights heavily on his aching chest. The nightmare shows him men, expiring on the battlefield with a curse on those who led them to their destruction. Every pang in his own wasting body brings to him in dream the recollection of pangs still worse, of pangs suffered through and for him. He sees and feels the torture of the fallen millions, who die after long hours of terrible mental and physical agony, who expire in forest and plain, in stagnant ditches by the roadside, in pools of blood under a sky made black with smoke. His eyes are once more rivet to the torrents of blood, every drop of which represents a tear of despair, a heart-rent cry, a lifelong sorrow. He hears again the thrilling sighs of desolation, and the shrill cries ringing through mount, forest, and valley. He sees the old mothers who have lost the light of their souls, families, the hand that fed them. He beholds widowed young wives thrown on the wide, cold world, and beggared orphans wailing in the streets by the thousands. He finds the young daughters of his bravest old soldiers exchanging their mourning garments for the gaudy frippery of prostitution, and the soul ego shudders in the sleeping form. His heart is rent by the groans of the famished, his eyes blinded by the smoke of burning hamlets, of homes destroyed, of towns and cities in smoldering ruins. And in his terrible dream, he remembers that moment of insanity in his soldier's life, when standing over a heap of the dead and the dying, waving in his right hand a naked sword red to its hilt with smoking blood, and in his left, the colors rent from the hand of the warrior expiring at his feet, he had sent in a stentorian voice praises to the throne of the Almighty, thanksgiving for the victory just obtained. He starts in his sleep and awakes in horror. A great shudder shakes his frame like an aspen leaf, and sinking back on his pillows, sick at the recollection, he hears a voice, the voice of the soul ego, saying in him, "Fame and victory are vainglorious words. Thanksgiving and praise for lives destroyed, wicked lies and blasphemy. What have they brought thee or to thy fatherland, those bloody victories?" whispers the soul in him. "A population clad in iron armor," it replies. 2 million of men dead now to all spiritual aspiration and soul life. A people, henceforth deaf to the peaceful voice of the honest citizen's duty, averse to a life of peace, blind to the arts and literature, indifferent to all but lucre and ambition. What is thy future kingdom, now? A legion of war puppets as units, a great wild beast in their collectivity. A beast that, like the sea yonder, slumbers gloomily now, but to fall with the more fury on the first enemy that is indicated to it. Indicated, by whom? It is as though a heartless, proud fiend, assuming sudden authority, incarnate ambition and power, had clutched with iron hand the minds of a whole country. By what wicked enchantment has he brought the people back to those primeval days of the nation when their ancestors, the yellow-haired Suevi, and the treacherous Franks roamed about in their warlike spirit, thirsting to kill, to decimate, and subject each other? By what infernal powers has this been accomplished? Yet the transformation has been produced, and it is as undeniable as the fact that alone the fiend rejoices and boasts of the transformation effected. The whole world is hushed in breathless expectation. Not a wife or mother, but is haunted in her dreams by the black and ominous storm cloud that overhangs the whole of Europe. The cloud is approaching. It comes nearer and nearer. O woe and horror! I foresee once more for earth the suffering I have already witnessed. I read the fatal destiny upon the brow of the flower of Europe's youth. But if I live and have the power, never, oh never shall my country take part in it again. No, no, I will not see the glutton death gorged with devouring lives. I will not hear robbed mothers' shrieks while from men's piteous wounds and horrid gashes the laboring life flows faster than the blood. 9 Firmer and firmer grows in the soul ego the feeling of intense hatred for the terrible butchery called war, deeper and deeper does it impress its thoughts upon the form that holds it captive. Hope awakens at times in the aching breast and colors the long hours of solitude and meditation, like the morning ray that dispels the dusky shades of shadowy despondency. it lightens the long hours of lonely thought. But as the rainbow is not always the dispeller of the storm clouds but often only a refraction of the setting sun on a passing cloud, so the moments of dreamy hope are generally followed by hours of still blacker despair. Why, oh why, thou mocking Nemesis, hast thou thus purified and enlightened among all the sovereigns of this earth, him, whom thou hast made helpless, speechless, and powerless? Why hast thou kindled th. flame of holy brotherly love for man in the breast of one whose heart already feels the approach of the icy hand of death and decay, whose strength is steadily deserting him and whose very life is melting away like foam on the crest of a breaking wave? And now the hand of fate is upon the couch of pain. The hour for the fulfillment of nature's law has struck at last. The old sire is no more, the younger man is henceforth a monarch. Voiceless and helpless, he is nevertheless a potentate, the autocratic master of millions of subjects. Cruel fate has erected a throne for him over an open grave, and beckons him to glory and to power. Devoured by suffering, he finds himself suddenly crowned. The wasted form is snatched from its warm nest amid the palm groves and the roses, it is whirled from balmy south to the frozen north, where waters harden into crystal groves and waves on waves in solid mountains rise, whither he now speeds to reign and speeds to die. Onward, onward rushes the black, fire-vomiting monster, devised by man to partially conquer space and time. Onward, and further with every moment from the health-giving, balmy south flies the train. Like the dragon of the fiery head, it devours distance and leaves behind it a long trail of smoke, sparks and stench. And as its long, tortuous, flexible body, wriggling and hissing like a gigantic dark reptile, glides swiftly, crossing mountain and moor, forest, tunnel, and plain, its swinging monotonous motion lulls the worn-out occupant, the weary and heart-sore form, to sleep. In the moving palace the air is warm and balmy. The luxurious vehicle is full of exotic plants, and from a large cluster of sweet-smelling flowers arises together with its scent the fairy queen of dreams, followed by her band of joyous elves. The dryads laugh in bare leafy bowers as the train glides by, and send floating upon the breeze dreams of green solitudes and fairy visions. The rumbling noise of wheels is gradually transformed into the roar of a distant waterfall, to subside into the silvery trills of a crystalline brook. The soul ego takes its flight into dreamland. It travels through eons of time and lives and feels, and breathes under the most contrasted forms and personages. It is now a giant, a Jotun, who rushes into Muspelheim, where Surtur rules with his flaming sword. It battles fearlessly against a host of monstrous animals, and puts them to flight with a single wave of its mighty hand. Then it sees itself in the northern mist world, it penetrates under the guise of a brave bowman into Helheim, the kingdom of the dead, where a black elf reveals to him a series of its lives and their mysterious concatenation. Why does man suffer, inquires the soul ego. Because he would become one, is the mocking answer. Forthwith, the soul ego stands in the presence of the holy goddess, Saga. She sings to it of the valorous deeds of the Germanic heroes, of their virtues and their vices. She shows the soul the mighty warriors fallen by the hands of many of its past forms, on battlefield, as also in the sacred security of home. It sees itself under the personages of maidens, and of women, of young and old men, and of children. It feels itself dying more than once in those forms. It expires as a hero spirit, and is led by the pitying Valkyries from the bloody battlefield back to the abode of bliss under the shining foliage of Valhalla. It heaves its last sigh in another form, and is hurled onto the cold, hopeless plain of remorse. It closes its innocent eyes in its last sleep, as an infant, and is forthwith carried along by the beauteous elves of light into another body, the doomed generator of pain and suffering. In each case the mists of death are dispersed, and pass from the eyes of the soul ego. No sooner does it cross the black abyss that separates the kingdom of the living from the realm of the dead. Thus death becomes but a meaningless word for it, a vain sound. In every instance the beliefs of the mortal take objective life and shape for the immortal, as soon as it spans the bridge. then they begin to fade, and disappear. What is my past? Inquires the soul ego of Ord, the eldest of the Norn sisters. Why do I suffer? A long parchment is unrolled in her hand, and reveals a long series of mortal beings, in each of whom the soul ego recognizes one of its dwellings. When it comes to the last but one, it sees a blood-stained hand doing endless deeds of cruelty and treachery, and it shudders. Guileless victims arise around it, and cry to Orlog for vengeance. What is my immediate present? Asks the dismayed soul of Verdandi, the second sister. The decree of Orlog is on thyself, is the answer. But Orlog does not pronounce them blindly, as foolish mortals have it. What is my future? Asks despairingly of Skuld, the third Norn sister, the soul ego. Is it to be forever with tears, and bereaved of hope? No answer is received. But the dreamer feels whirled through space, and suddenly the scene changes. The soul ego finds itself on a, to it, long familiar spot, the royal bower, and the seat opposite the broken palm tree. Before it stretches, as formerly, the vast blue expanse of waters, glassing the rocks and cliffs. There, too, is the lonely palm, doomed to quick disappearance. The soft mellow voice of the incessant ripple of the light waves now assumes human speech, and reminds the soul ego of the vows formed more than once on that spot. And the dreamer repeats with enthusiasm the words pronounced before. Never, oh, never shall I, henceforth, sacrifice for vainglorious fame or ambition a single son of my motherland. Our world is so full of unavoidable misery, so poor with joys and bliss, and shall I add to its cup of bitterness the fathomless ocean of woe and blood? Called war? Avaunt, such thought. Oh, nevermore. 11 Strange sight and change. The broken palm which stands before the mental sight of the soul ego suddenly lifts up its drooping trunk and becomes erect and verdant as before. Still greater bliss, the soul ego finds himself as strong and as healthy as he ever was. In a stentorian voice he sings to the four winds aloud and a joyous song. He feels a wave of joy and bliss in him, and seems to know why he is happy. He is suddenly transported into what looks a fairy-like hall, lit with most glowing lights and built of materials, the like of which he had never seen before. He perceives the heirs and descendants of all the monarchs of the globe gathered in that hall in one happy family. They wear no longer the insignia of royalty, but, as he seems to know, those who are the reigning princes, reign by virtue of their personal merits. It is the greatness of heart, the nobility of character, their superior qualities of observation, wisdom, love of truth and justice, that have raised them to the dignity of heirs to the thrones of kings and queens. The crowns, by authority and the grace of God, have been thrown off, and they now rule by the grace of divine humanity, chosen unanimously by recognition of their fitness to rule, and the reverential love of their voluntary subjects. All around seems strangely changed. Ambition, grasping greediness, or envy miscalled patriotism exist no longer. Cruel selfishness has made room for just altruism, and cold indifference to the wants of the millions no longer finds favor in the sight of the favored few. Useless luxury, sham pretenses social and religious, all has disappeared. No more wars are possible, for the armies are abolished. Soldiers have turned into diligent, hard-working tillers of the ground, and the whole globe echoes his song in rapturous joy. Kingdoms and countries around him live like brothers. The great, the glorious hour has come at last. That which he hardly dared to hope and think about in the stillness of his long, suffering nights, is now realized. The great curse is taken off, and the world stands absolved and redeemed in its regeneration. Trembling with rapturous feelings, his heart overflowing with love and philanthropy, he rises to pour out a fiery speech that would become historic, when suddenly he finds his body gone, or, rather, it is replaced by another body. Yes, it is no longer the tall, noble form with which he is familiar, but the body of somebody else, of whom he as yet knows nothing. Something dark comes between him and a great dazzling light, and he sees the shadow of the face of a gigantic timepiece on the ethereal waves? On its ominous dial he reads, New Era, 970,995 years since the instantaneous destruction by pneumodino vril of the last 2 million of soldiers in the field, on the western portion of the globe 971,000 solar years since the submersion of the European continents and isles. Such are the decree of Orlok. And the answer of Skuld. He makes a strong effort and is himself again. Prompted by 44 cycles and human destiny, the soul ego to remember and act in conformity, he lifts his arms to heaven and swears in the face of all nature to preserve peace to the end of his days in his own country, at least. A distant beating of drums and long cries of what he fancies in his dream are the rapturous thanksgivings, for the pledge just taken. An abrupt shock, loud clatter, and, as the eyes open, the soul ego looks out through them in amazement. The heavy gaze meets the respectful and solemn face of the physician offering the usual draft. The train stops. He rises from his couch weaker and wearier than ever, to see around him endless lines of troops armed with a new and yet more murderous weapon of destruction ready for the battlefield. Sanjana. Theosophical Literature Isis Unveiled, A Master Key to the Mysteries of Ancient and Modern Science and Theology by H. P. Blavatsky Volume I Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Volume Phi Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in photographic facsimile of the original edition, 1877, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with general index and supplementary topical index. American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H. P. Blavatsky Vol. I Cosmogenesis, Slady I plus 676 pages. Volume 2 Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to The Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above. Reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of theosophy by H. P. Blavatsky. Reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H. P. Blavatsky. A blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacarya, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H. P. Blavatsky. Reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H. P. Blavatsky. A collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge. A comprehensive text on the theosophical philosophy by a co-founder of the theosophical movement, widely used as a text in study classes. Reprint of original edition, 1893, 15 plus 182 pages. Indian edition The Bhagavad Gita rendered into English by William Q. Judge. An ancient dialogue of philosophical religion from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. Cloth, 18 plus 133 pages. Indian edition Notes on the Bhagavad Gita by W. Q. Judge. Indian edition Letters That Have Helped Me by W. Q. Judge. American edition, and shorter Indian edition The Friendly Philosopher, compiled from Letters and Talks by Robert Crosby, 415 pages, cloth American edition Universal Theosophy by Robert Crosby, Indian edition. 5 years of Theosophy essays selected from the Theosophist. American edition order from Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Bangalore 560,004 India.